There are three types of people in this story today, at least. The first type is a thrower. There's many of them. There's throwers in this story. There's people who throw people under the bus, as it were, or in pits, as the case may be. There are victims, and in some cases, real victims, not just those who play the role. But we'll see today how these victims are transformed. And a third is that there are witnesses. And these witnesses are watchers of what's going on, the throwing, the victims. They have to choose what they're going to do. Are they going to try to be a hero, or are they going to stand by and watch passively? And so we have three types of people in the story. I want us to return back today where we started. I told you that there were throwers in the pit. There are victims. And there are witnesses in this story. And this is where God's upper story, this story that we are participating in, and our lower story, our own lives, this is where it meets today. In Jacob and Joseph's story, we learn, we grow, we can change, and we can wrestle with our own story. Now, to the victims. Because really participating in this story is not just participating and listening to the story going on, but it's finding ourselves in this story. Do you identify with Joseph? Do you identify yourself as a victim? God knows about your life. He knows what's going on in it. He knows that you were a victim from a family member, from alcoholism. He knows about the divorce. He knows about the abuse. He knows about the forced abortion. He knows and He loves you. And for many years, many of us identify with being thrown under the bus. We're victims. And yet, God also knows your scars. He sees them. And God believes this about life, that scars do not grow on dead people. The wounds that are caused in our lives and those scars that form are signs and symbols of life, that you're a survivor. And you do not, I repeat, do not have to identify yourself as a victim for the rest of your life. Joseph did not. Now, we'll have a little bit more to say about that. But to the throwers, to those who throw people under the bus, many of you don't even know you did it. I throw people under the bus and don't even know I do it. None of us have a pass to excuse ourselves from thinking we haven't offended or thrown someone in a pit. None of us are excused from Psalm 139 that says, "See if there be some wicked way in me, O God. If I have offended any of you, then I am sorry." And it's up to each one of us to look into our hearts and discern if we have been a thrower, if we have been a persecutor, if we have been an offender, if we've stolen someone's birthright, and what are we going to do about it? And to the witnesses, what did Reuben and Judah do? I mean, Reuben wanted to go back and get his brother out of the pit. Judah didn't want to shed his brother's blood, but he still sold him into slavery. Jacob still stole his brother's birthright. And maybe Reuben and Judah were trying to be heroes, but ultimately they did nothing. They were passive. Now, if you read the story, Judah and Reuben get into some other trouble that we're not going to talk about here. It's not even appropriate to talk about here. It was so bad. Well, some witnesses say, I don't want to get involved. And we need to look into our lives and say, am I a witness to some stuff in my family, at my work, in my church, in my group, in my neighborhood? Am I just passively watching someone get thrown under the bus? And you're going to have to decide if you're going to do something about it. And the way that you decide that is you look and see what God's passionate about, and you become passionate about it. That's the simple way that you decide that. Well, let's look at, we talked about rival stories. And I want to look at one of the biggest rival stories in this particular chapter. Because there's God's story and there's our story, and sometimes we are, instead of listening to God's story, we're following rival stories. And one of the worst and biggest rival stories of today and of our lives, and described in what I just went through with victims and throwers, and all the interweaving of witnesses and how we have to try to figure that out. You know what one of the biggest rival stories of our lives is? It's unforgiveness. Simple as that. It's unforgiveness. And Joseph discovered, and you'll discover, that to forgive is to set a prisoner free and discover that the prisoner was you. I love the late pastor Billy Joe Daugherty used to always say, unforgiveness is like drinking poison and expecting it to kill somebody else. Unforgiveness kills us. But we need to understand what forgiveness is not. Forgiveness is not accepting. It is not condoning. It is not appeasing. It is not even reconciling sometimes. You can forgive somebody and not reconcile and not come back together. There can be forgiveness on your part without a reconciliation. Sometimes that needs to happen. Is there to be a separation? Forgiveness does not necessarily mean you always have to go back to a situation. And in fact, some people need out of certain situations where there is abuse. And so forgiveness is not accepting someone's ill treatment toward you. It's not condoning it. It's not appeasing it. It is accepting the option that you can forgive them. And you don't have to forget it. Some people say forgiving is forgetting, but in many cases you do not need to forget. In the case of abuse, if a daughter is abused and she grows up, she does not need to forget and allow her own daughter to be put in a situation of abuse. So memory can have a role in forgiveness. Now, Chris Giles, a local licensed marriage and family therapist, he says that 70% of mental illness stems from unforgiveness. And that's not to discount all the other elements in that, but there is a huge role in illness and mental illness with unforgiveness. And he defined forgiveness as this: people determine that they have been wronged, intentionally abandon anger and resentment, and try to respond to the wrongdoer with love, compassion, grace, and fairness, even when the wrongdoer does not deserve it. After Jacob died, they'd all moved to Goshen. Jacob died. The brothers started fearing again that Jacob was sort of a buffer between Joseph and them. And when Jacob died, they started getting nervous that Joseph would retaliate. And they started wondering if they'd really been forgiven. And so they came back to Joseph, and get this, they bowed to him. Some dreams come true. It's not in the way that we think they're going to come true. And they said, please, do you forgive us? And I want us to hear, as we finish up today, the words of Joseph and connect it to what we've just spent about 10 minutes talking about related to victims and throwers and witnesses. Relate it to that and relate it to your own life. And listen to Joseph's words here. When Joseph's brothers saw their father was dead, they said, what if Joseph holds a grudge against us and pays us back for all the wrongs we did to him? So they sent word to Joseph saying, your father left these instructions before he died. This is what you are to say to Joseph. I ask you to forgive your brothers the sins and the wrongs they committed in treating you so badly. Now, please forgive the sins of the servants of God of your father. And when their message came to him, Joseph wept again. His brothers then came and threw themselves down and said, we are your slaves. But Joseph said, don't be afraid. Am I in the place of God? And here, listen to this line. You intended to harm me. You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good. Why? To accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives. So then, don't be afraid. I will provide for you and your children. And he assured them and spoke kindly to them. Does that sound familiar? That's what Jesus did for us. What humanity meant for evil, God meant for good at the cross. And today, as we come to the table of forgiveness, the table is a place that when you do gather at Thanksgiving, that's a place that should be about forgiveness and love and grace. But this table, these tables that we're going to go to, those are tables that are about the broken body of Jesus and his shed blood, because he knows that we are broken. And he knows that we have been victims. And he knows that we don't have to keep that identity as victims. We can be like Joseph and say, what you meant for harm, God meant for good, to save lives. And so we have control. We have a little bit of control today to say, I can live that story. I want to live that story, not this rival story of unforgiveness. And so as we come to the table today, we're going to have two responses. The first is for prayer. And it may be that you just want to come forward, and there'll be some shepherds, elders here praying with you. They'll be happy to pray with you. If you want to fill out a card that is in the bulletin and just write something about what you'd like prayers for, that's fine. You don't have to do that. You can come and just say, I have had this identity as a victim for so many years, and I just want to start the process of forgiveness. I just want to start choosing that option. Or to say, I've thrown somebody under the bus. No big details are needed there. Just, I have hurt someone and I need prayers for how to address that. Or I have stood idly by. I've sat and watched something happen that I shouldn't have. And I want to do something about it. And I need the courage and the power of God to do that. So the first response is prayer. And so when we start to sing, there'll be a time of response and invitation for us to come and receive prayer if you'd like that. And the second response is to go to the tables and to receive the forgiveness and the grace of the Lord that table is all about. What humanity meant for evil on the cross, God meant for good, to save many lives.